Growing up, I always told myself that I wouldn't have a roommate. But honestly, moving in with my brother Anthony was one of the best decisions that I made out of college. We always motivated each other to do better and work harder, but we also weren't above enjoying ourselves and relaxing when we had time off. And we actually made a tradition out of some things. For instance, whenever one of us heard the other rummaging around the kitchen for food and we wanted to grab food, we would just text the other person one word: "Nosh." It means to eat. And that would usually result in us taking a trip to Wendy's or something. This was something that we did at all hours of the day, and it actually alerted me to trouble one time, believe it or not. You see, it was on a day that I had off from work, but Anthony was working overnight. So when I went into my room to go to sleep that night, I texted my brother to make sure that he had his key, and when he responded with a yes, I locked the front door and went to bed. It must have been like 1 a.m. by the time I actually passed out, and I only got about 2 hours of sleep before I was woken up by the sound of something moving around in the kitchen. I sat up and listened closely to make sure I wasn't hearing things, but I knew that I wasn't when I heard the sound of dishes clattering in the drying tray near the kitchen sink. Right away, I figured that it was Anthony, so I checked my phone to see what time it was, and I was surprised that it was only 3 a.m. because he wasn't supposed to get out of work until 6:30 at the earliest. I was tired though and decided to just shrug my shoulders and lay back down, hoping that he would be a little quieter after he finished his hunt for grub. But that wasn't the case. After laying down for a few seconds, I could hear the opening and closing of the cabinets, and that was followed by what seemed like all the drawers in the kitchen. And by that point, I figured I probably wasn't going to get back to sleep right away anyways, so I figured why not grab some food too. That was when I pulled my phone off of my nightstand and texted Anthony a single word: "Nosh?" It only took a few seconds for him to reply, but it wasn't what I expected at all. Instead of saying yes or no, my brother replied with a text that simply said, "I'm not home yet." My eyes widened as I stared at the screen, frozen with fear. The sound of whoever was in my house was slowly being overshadowed by the sound of my heart pounding in my chest. I quickly texted Anthony and told him that there was someone in the house and to call the cops. By that point, I could hear whoever it was making their way from the kitchen into the living room area, still opening and closing all the drawers and doors that they could. It was like they were looking for something that they could possibly find. I decided that my best bet would be to lock my bedroom door and lay low until the police arrived. I slowly made my way over to my bedroom door, and as quietly as I could, I turned the lock. What I didn't account for, though, was Anthony texting me back. My phone vibrated as I received the message and ended up falling off my nightstand and smacking into the hardwood floor. All sounds throughout the house seemed to disappear as we were engulfed in silence. A silence that was quickly broken by the sound of whoever it was in my house sprinting down the hall toward my bedroom. I didn't have any time. All I could think to do was to push my bed up against the door and hope that it holds the intruder out. The fear inside of me continued to grow as whoever it was started trying to throw the full weight of their body against the door. Thankfully, I was able to use my bed frame to hold it shut. The intruder gave up on trying to get through my door to me after a minute or two, and I remember the sound of them sprinting back into the front of my house and then right out the front door. I waited in my bedroom until the police arrived just in case they decided to return, but once I was out of my room, I could see that whoever it was had broken in through the kitchen window that was right above the sink. Sadly, the police weren't able to find whoever it was that tried to rob me that night, but after that, I now make sure every window is locked and secure before going to bed. One of the closest friends I ever had was my dog, Gordy. He was the most loyal companion I ever had, and he made my childhood and adolescence so much fun. We got Gordy when I was 6 years old, and by the time I was 12, he had proved to be very obedient and very protective of us. And honestly, he was the only reason that my parents let me stay home by myself while they were at work or went out on their monthly date nights. They knew that I would be responsible because I had never caused any trouble, and they knew I'd be safe because Gordy wouldn't ever let anything happen to me. I'll never forget one night when I was home by myself. I think my parents were out at the movies, and there wasn't anything that I wanted to see, so I chose to just stay home and play some video games. And when it was just me in my house, Gordy would always be in whatever room I was hanging out in, but for some reason that night, he stayed in the living room for a while even though I was in my bedroom. I tried not to take it personally though, and just played some games as I waited for my parents to get home with some dessert for me. But things started to get a little weird when I noticed Gordy walking up and down the hallway. It was almost like he was tracking something back and forth with his nose pressed almost directly onto the floor. I paused my game and watched him for a minute, and that was when I realized that he might need to go for a walk. So I quickly hopped up and made my way toward the front door, and I'll never forget the strange whining noise that he made as I passed by him. I grabbed the harness that we put on Gordy and tried to call him over to me, but when he finally came to me, he wouldn't come all the way to the front door. Instead, it was like he was trying to get me to follow him. I hung the harness back up and began to follow Gordy down the hallway. He stopped about halfway down the hall and then looked up toward the ceiling where we had a hatch that led up to a small attic area that was more like a crawl space. We both looked up at the hatch, and before I could even reach for the rope that was used to pull it open, Gordy began to bark. I told him to calm down as I slowly pulled the entryway to the attic open. The ladder unfolded, and as I started to climb it, I turned on the flashlight app on my cell phone. I could hear Gordy growling as I poked my head into the crawl space and looked around. I didn't climb all the way up into the attic, but I was pretty sure that nothing was up there, so I just closed it up and tried to help Gordy calm down. But he wouldn't stop staring up at the attic and growling as if there was something up there. I tried to not let it get to me, but as I made my way back into my room, I swear that I heard something shuffling around above me. My eyes widened as I continued to listen closely. After about a second, I heard the same shuffling noise as before, only this time it wasn't right over my head. As I looked out into the hall, I could see Gordy walking toward the back of the house with his eyes locked on the ceiling above him, as if he could see through the floor into the attic at whatever was making that noise. Through the sound of my dog snarling, I heard a strange thump on the ground from the other side of the wall as if something had fallen outside. I quickly rushed over to the window in my parents' bedroom, which was closest to where the sound came from, and I'll never forget locking eyes with a full-grown man as he got himself up off the ground and stared right through the window at me. He was frozen in place, but he didn't look scared. I'm sure I did though. I could hardly breathe at that point. Thankfully, Gordy started to bark loudly at the wall, which was loud enough to startle the man outside, who quickly turned and ran through my backyard and into the woods. I immediately called my parents, who rushed home as fast as they could. My dad went up and checked out that attic and was upset when he saw that the small window had been left wide open for some reason, and right outside of the window was our central AC unit that they must have stepped on to get up into it. We called the police to report the incident, but beyond that, nothing could really be done about whoever it was that was trying to break into our attic. I was 15 years old, and it was the middle of winter vacation. My parents and my younger sister were all out doing some last-minute Christmas shopping while I stayed at home cleaning up the house. I was particularly excited for Christmas that year because I knew I was getting a new phone and I desperately needed one. Mine had a busted screen that was hardly legible. I could basically only use it to receive phone calls, and even then I couldn't tell who they were from until I answered. Well, that night I had just finished straightening up the couch and the coffee table in the living room when I heard my phone ringing from my bedroom. By the time I made it through my house to it though, the call had ended and all I could do was wait to see if they called back. And in that scenario, they happened to call back almost immediately, which made me think that it was important. So that time I made sure to answer. But oddly enough, I didn't recognize the voice on the other end of the phone. I remember feeling horrible as I had to ask, "Who is this?" To which they responded by telling me that it didn't matter who they were. They said, "I've been watching you, and now that nobody's around to stop me, you better watch out." And then they hung up. I shook my head and practically scoffed at such a weak prank call, but that was when my phone rang again. I answered it, and this time all they said was, "What are you shaking your head for?" I froze as I realized that whoever it was calling me could see me somehow. I looked toward the window in my bedroom and tried to see outside, but it was too dark. That was when the voice on the phone spoke again. "You won't be able to see me coming." And then they hung up again. I couldn't use my phone to make calls, so I sprinted as fast as I could to our cordless house phone and began to dial my mom's phone number. As I waited for her to pick up her phone, I ran to the front door and double-locked it, and then I did the same for our back door. Thankfully, my mom answered and I tried to explain to her what was going on, but I don't know if she thought I was joking or just trying to stay calm, but all she said was, "We'll be home in 10 minutes. And then we were interrupted by the sound of my cell phone ringing. I answered it and asked whoever it was what they wanted and why they were messing with me, but all they said was, "The person you called can't help you. I'm already here." And then they hung up for a third time. My mom was still on my house phone and could hear the fear in my voice, and that was when she gave me permission to do something that might have saved my life. She told me the combination to our gun safe and gave me permission to load our shotgun just in case anything happened. She also made sure I stayed on the line with her as she talked me through the process of driving home. Thankfully, it didn't take them long to get home, and by the time they did, I hadn't received any more phone calls, and I thought it was finally all over. But later that night, I got one last call right before I went to bed. It was from the same person who had been tormenting me that night. All they said was, "You're lucky." And then they hung up, and as far as I know, that was the last time I ever spoke with that person again. To this day, I still don't know who or why someone was messing with me like that.